At the beginning of the film, we're shown a shootout in a neighborhood. A man with a handgun walks into a bar where bodies are strewn across the floor. On the second floor, he hears footsteps and gunfire, so he heads up quietly and on guard. We're taken back to the past, to 1989. We see a married couple bring their older son, Chris, to the Harbor Neuroscience Clinic, where the boy is diagnosed with a high-functioning form of autism. His mother is convinced the cause was the constant relocations due to her husband's military service, and the only person Chris connects with is his younger brother. While the parents discuss their son's condition with the doctor, the boy is putting together a puzzle, and Mr. Smith advises leaving him at the clinic for the summer. But the military father is dead set against it.
If loud noises and bright lights bother him, he needs more of it, not less.
He's fully convinced that Chris has to learn to live in the real world so he doesn't lose himself. When the boy has almost finished the puzzle, a single missing piece sends him into a panic. But everything changes when the clinic owner's daughter hands him the missing fragment, and the boy completes the picture. Years pass. Chris becomes an accountant and auditor and rents an office not far from Chicago. This day, a married couple comes to him, worn out from paying enormous taxes. He helps them structure their finances smartly to reduce what they owe. In gratitude, the clients invite him to fish on their land, and learning that Chris is into firearms, they add that they've got a place to shoot too. Around the same time, Ray King, the director of the Treasury Department's Financial Crimes Division, calls an analyst, Mary Beth Medina. She's worked at the department for 5 years, but when she was hired, she concealed that she'd had run-ins with the law in her youth. King admits he could end her career, but instead, he offers her a deal. He hands her photographs taken in various corners of the world. In every shot, the same man is meeting with the heads of criminal organizations. King has managed to determine that this person uses the names Carl Gauss, Lewis Carroll, and others.
All describing the same man, an accountant, our accountant.
The unknown man audits the finances of the largest criminal structures, and now Medina has to establish his true identity. Meanwhile, Chris is driving home. He leads a closed-off, orderly life. All of his things are neatly arranged and in their proper places. Coming back from work, he has dinner and then goes into a separate room, turns on loud music, and puts himself through the routine his father once taught him. This is what the therapy looks like, and during these sessions, Chris is flooded with memories of his childhood. He remembers the day his mother left the family, unable to cope with the fact that her older son was different from everyone else and that her husband had refused to leave the boy at the clinic. Not understanding why his mother was abandoning them, Chris goes through a severe panic attack, which he manages to suppress with a counting rhyme he learned from his father. After the session in the room and a pill, Chris does accept the couple's invitation and heads to their farm, where he practices shooting. They watch him through the window.
Looks like somebody's seen too many westerns.
As he takes a long time to set up before each shot.
Holy shit.
After that, he drives to the mobile home, where he keeps weapons, cash, and expensive paintings that clients have used to pay him. He turns on music and lies down on the bed, where he recalls how, years ago in prison, a man named Francis introduced him to the criminal world after noticing Chris's remarkable abilities. It was Francis who taught him how to keep the books for dirty money and advised him to always work through a single intermediary so as not to repeat the mistakes that landed Francis himself in prison.
You can't go back, you understand? It's dangerous, do you understand? You find one person you can trust, just one.
That intermediary turns out to be a woman with a robotic voice who warns Chris that the authorities have started taking an interest in his activities. She advises him to step away from his criminal clients for a while and suggests he take on an audit of the finances of a company called Living Robotics. The very next day, Chris goes to meet with the company's chief financial officer and the owner's sister. Chris was recommended to them by Mansour Haqqani, a scientist for whose daughter the company developed prosthetics. Rita doesn't understand why a man with a doctorate in mathematics decided to turn to him specifically. Ed thinks inviting Chris is a mistake, since he personally handles all of the company's finances, which means there can't be any irregularities. But Chris himself couldn't care less. He asks for all of the company's financial records going back 15 years. The implication offends Chilton, but Rita agrees to meet the auditor's demands. Soon, Chris meets the company's owner, Lamar Blackburn. He admits that money was never his main priority, and that's precisely why they decided to bring in an independent auditor. Meanwhile, Medina comes to the conclusion that the accountant uses the names of famous mathematicians as aliases, and she sends his photo to the database search department. At the same time, in a parking lot in Switzerland, a financier named Simon Dewey gets into his car, only to have a stranger climb in beside him. Simon tells him to get out of the car immediately, but the stranger makes it clear he hasn't come to hear complaints. He explains that he works for a private security firm whose clients lost large sums due to Dewey's schemes. The man warns that this is their last meeting under such civil circumstances, and that if the financier tries to pull something like this again, he'll simply be eliminated. The next morning, Chris begins his work, where he's greeted by junior accountant Dana Cummings, who was the first to notice the shortfall. She offers the auditor her help, but Chris coldly declines. Dana realizes it's easier for him to work alone. He's even brought his own food. Meanwhile, Medina is informed that the photo she sent has been matched to a record in the New York police database. Several years ago, this man burst into the headquarters of the Gambino crime family and took out everyone inside, including Anthony Bazan himself. He acted like a professional because nearly all the victims were killed with shots to the head, and Bazan himself was dispatched with a blow from a blunt object. What's more, there were listening devices installed in the club that recorded the sounds of the massacre. Meanwhile, Chris decides to take a break and have lunch alone, but Dana ends up right next to him, trying to strike up a conversation.
Dad's taste ran more to dogs playing poker.
I like dogs playing poker because dogs would never bet on things.
Yeah, dogs playing poker is nice.
But every attempt she makes to get closer runs into a wall. One Chris tries, without success, to hide. The only thing that sparks his interest is painting, especially a picture of dogs playing poker, which he likes for its absurdity. Dana realizes Chris isn't in the mood to talk and leaves. It's precisely among numbers that Chris feels in his element. He reads financial reports like an open book, catching the slightest discrepancy, and once he's immersed in the work, he practically stops noticing the world around him. Meanwhile, Medina continues her investigation too. Having gained access to the audio recording from the police archive, she listens to it over and over, sensing she's missing an important detail. Adjusting the settings and filtering out the noise, she finally makes out the killer's voice, monotonously repeating a children's rhyme about Solomon Grundy. The next morning, Dana comes into the office and is stunned to realize Chris worked through the entire night. His abilities strike her as almost supernatural. Where it took her 4 months to check the reports for a single year, Chris managed to analyze the company's financial data over several years in just 24 hours.
I went through these ledgers for months and I got through one fiscal year.
Yes.
You went through 15 overnight?
And the result shocks Rita. Chris reports that $61 million was siphoned out of the company, and while he doesn't yet know who's behind the theft, he promises to get to the bottom of it. That same evening, Ed comes down to the living room of his home and finds a stranger there. The hitman makes it clear he knows about the money stolen from Living Robotics. To keep the situation from getting worse, Ed is to stage his own death as an accident.
You administer your own accidental insulin overdose. And just die.
In that case, his wife, sleeping peacefully upstairs, will be provided for the rest of her life thanks to the insurance. But if he refuses, they'll have to kill them both and stage it as an ordinary robbery. The next morning, Chris returns to his work and discovers that all of his records have been destroyed. At that moment, Blackburn walks into the office and informs him that because of the investigation that had begun, Ed took his own life.
Ed was a diabetic for 30 years. You think he didn't know how to check his blood sugar?
The owner blames himself for trying to dig up the truth, which led to his friend's death. And after paying Chris off, he leaves, leaving the auditor alone with Dana. For anyone else, this would simply be an unfinished job. But for Chris, it's different. The chain he'd been building in his head suddenly breaks off, and the world where every detail has to be in its proper place plunges back into chaos, and he can barely hold back a panic attack.
I'm not finished. I'm not finished with this. Look at this. This is out of order. I need to completely rearrange this.
Chris withdraws into himself and, coming home, begins his routine, the only way he has of keeping his inner balance. The unfinished work eats at him from the inside, forcing him back again and again to the ritual that helps him keep control. Heading out to the now familiar farm, Chris sinks back into his childhood memories. Once, he and his brother tried to beat the martial arts instructor their father had hired. Despite all their efforts, the boys were defeated time after time. The trainer started to feel sorry for them, but their father was unyielding, believing his sons simply weren't trying hard enough. Lost in his own thoughts, Chris doesn't notice an unfamiliar car pull up to the farmer's house, and soon the homeowners are taken hostage.
Call the bookkeeper in.
Let's go. Get up. Come on.
One of the hitmen demands that Dolores call Chris out, but the moment the woman steps into the yard, a rifle shot takes the head clean off one of the hitmen. And with his next shots, Chris disables the car. Realizing he's up against a professional, the second hitman tries to escape in the farmer's vehicle, but Chris gives him no chance. He catches up to the damaged car, drags the man out, and transforms from a quiet auditor into a cold-blooded killer who takes down the big bruiser single-handedly. Calling his intermediary, he reports the attack and asks her to immediately wipe all the data from the computers in his office. She replies that she's already working on changing his identity and advises him to forget about Dana while there's still a chance to disappear. But Chris can't leave her to die. He gets her address and heads straight to her home. He arrives just in time and spots a man following Dana. Chris doesn't make it into the elevator with them and races up the stairs. But Dana herself has no intention of going down without a fight and desperately struggles to survive.
Could have used a small box. She looked bigger in the photo.
A knock at the door distracts one of the attackers, and Chris kills him, then dispatches the second just as coldly. Realizing there's no other option, Chris takes Dana to his secret hideout. She's convinced they need to go to the police, but he tells her the police won't be able to protect them, and she realizes Chris is far from an ordinary accountant. But what strikes her most is the painting on the ceiling. She's long admired this artist. Meanwhile, Medina continues her investigation. Getting in touch with her, an agent reports that the man on the audio recording repeated the rhyme 4 times in a row, without ever once changing the tempo of his speech or his intonation. Behavioral traits like this are often found in people with mental conditions, including people with autism, which frequently shows up through weak social skills, difficulty communicating, and avoiding eye contact. This detail leads Medina to a new idea. She decides to check the database for men whose names resemble those of famous mathematicians and who have an income exceeding $1 million. Meanwhile, Chris rents a hotel room where Dana thanks him for saving her. She learns that the paintings she saw in the trailer are genuine originals that clients used to pay him for his services. It's getting harder and harder for the woman to believe an ordinary accountant is sitting in front of her, and she asks where he got skills like these. So Chris admits that he has autism, and that to prepare his son for real life, his father had hired instructors from childhood to teach him to fight, shoot, and survive.
He lived in 34 homes in 17 years.
You moved 34 times?
Mm-hmm.
God, that's extraordinary.
During the conversation, it suddenly dawns on Chris. Someone was pulling money out of living Robotics and then putting it back, artificially inflating the company's profits to turn it into a publicly traded corporation. On the way to Rita's house, Chris's intermediary again tries to convince him to drop this case and disappear. But Chris understands that if he stops, Dana will be killed. Pulling up to Rita's house, he notices a man walking out of it and gives chase. But the man spots the tail and opens fire. It's enough for him to get away. Entering the house, Chris finds Rita dead. Soon Sam determines that a man named Christian Wolff owns an accounting firm through which he moves money, using a network of small businesses near his office. Having gathered all the information, Medina goes to Ray and reports that she's found the man's real name. In addition to illegally moving large sums, Christian Wolff donated $1 million last year to the Harvard Neuroscience Clinic. And after hearing her out, Ray declares that they are flying to Chicago immediately. Returning to the hotel, Chris sees Dana sleeping, and it once again brings back memories of his childhood. Years ago, his father brought him and his brother to a group of teenagers who'd been bullying Chris. Instead of stepping in, his father declared that his son had to decide for himself how to handle it.
The oldest is choosing to be a victim. Second oldest, loyalty.
After thinking for a moment, Chris lunges at the bullies, and an instant later, his younger brother joins the fight, and the two of them easily handle the older opponents. Not wanting to put Dana in danger, Chris leaves her a note and leaves the room. The next day, the feds track down his home, but Chris has already cleared out everything important. Even the security system installed around the property only confirms Medina's suspicions that the man they're dealing with has worked with dangerous people for far too long to live safely. They even find a minigun in the garage.
Don't see that every day.
Meanwhile, the hitman is organizing the defense of Blackburn's mansion. He understands perfectly well that the auditor, who's already taken down several professionals, could come for the company's owner at any moment. Left alone with Medina, Ray finally reveals the truth about why the mysterious auditor's career matters so much to him. We're shown a scene from the beginning of the film. It all began many years ago when a young Army officer and an elderly colonel found themselves at the funeral of a woman named Lorraine Alton. No one ever figured out how the fight started, but in the end, 6 people ended up in the hospital, and one of the police officers accidentally shot the colonel. Wolff wound up in military prison, but it soon became clear that his abilities were too valuable to the state. Chris had a phenomenal talent for analyzing data, spotting financial schemes, and identifying money laundering channels. So his file was classified, and Chris himself began to be used in various operations. That was when Ray got the assignment to work with Francis Silverberg, a legend of shadow accounting who had served Tony Bazan's clan for decades. Over time, the mob boss decided the old man had become a weak link and ordered his son Anthony to eliminate him. Francis managed to escape.
The protection that he was promised when he testified against Big Tony.
After that, he asked the authorities for protection in exchange for cooperation. While in the correctional center, Francis met Chris. They shared a cell and talked a great deal, and it was then that the old man taught him everything he himself knew about the financial world of crime. But Ray decided the old man's information wasn't valuable enough, and the authorities essentially left him to fend for himself. And the moment Francis got out, Bazan's men grabbed him and tortured him to death. Realizing he'd effectively signed the man's death warrant, Ray began surveilling the headquarters of the Bazan clan. Around the same time, Chris learned about the murder of Francis, whom he considered a friend. In a rage, he knocked out a guard, escaped from the center, and soon someone carried out a massacre at the mob's headquarters. When Ray burst inside the building, he heard gunshots and the screams of Tony Bazan begging for mercy. But the killer showed none. A moment later, Ray himself was in the crosshairs. It was Chris who asked him a question.
Your name? Raymond King.
Ray admitted he'd been a bad agent, but that he'd tried to be a good father, and so Chris let him go. The encounter shook Ray so deeply that he decided to leave the service. But right before his retirement, an unknown woman called him. She said she worked for the auditor and began passing Ray information about drug traffickers, human trafficking, and the financial schemes of the largest criminal organizations.
Do you like puzzles, Raymond King?
Over time, Ray realized that by leaking information to the authorities, Chris only eliminated those who violated his moral code. Ray isn't telling Medina this whole story, if for nothing. He admits that he's retiring soon, which means someone else will have to answer the auditor's calls. But Medina is against it. To her, Chris remains a killer who collaborates with criminals and has become part of that world himself. But Ray replies that sometimes the system doesn't give you the chance to choose between right and wrong, and if a chance to do even a little bit of good opens up before her, she shouldn't turn it down. Their conversation is interrupted by a phone call, and that same robotic voice asks Medina to write down information connected to living robotics. That same evening, Blackburn, surrounded by armed specialists, is trying to describe Chris's appearance when a sudden shot cuts his words short. The hitman instantly realizes the attack has begun and orders his men to prepare their defense. Chris has already taken out the outer guards, Some he's tied up and begun questioning.
Go.
Opening fire on the house, he literally turns the mansion into a combat zone. Sitting down at the surveillance monitors, the hitman sends his men to the entrance, counting on stopping Chris with sheer numbers. But the operatives underestimate their opponent. Acting with frightening precision, Chris eliminates the fighters one after another, like a machine programmed to kill. Reaching the second floor, he runs into a new group of guards. One of the fighters manages to wound him, but this doesn't stop Chris. He kills several opponents almost instantly, and with the last one, a grueling fight breaks out. The opponent proves to be a strong adversary, but even he fails to stop the auditor. Watching what's happening through the cameras, the hitman unexpectedly hears the familiar rhyme about Solomon Grundy, and in that moment, the terrible truth dawns on him.
That was the end of Solomon Grundy.
Rising from his desk, he heads out to meet Chris, killing the last surviving fighter along the way. And glancing at the hitman, Chris recognizes his own brother. Braxton admits he's spent 10 years trying to find him and still blames Chris for their father's death. He believes it was his older brother who took their father to the funeral of the mother who'd once abandoned them. A brief but fierce clash breaks out between the brothers, ending in Braxton's defeat.
Your fault that Pop's dead, you hear me?
Sorry, Braxton.
And in that moment, he realizes that only their blood ties are keeping his brother from killing him. Chris asks forgiveness for taking their father to the funeral, and Braxton can't understand why his brother didn't ask him to come along, since he was always ready to stand by him to the end. It hurts him too that Chris never once tried to find him, but Chris admits he'd known where his younger brother was the whole time. It's just that the people he works with are too dangerous, and he didn't want to put Braxton at risk. Blackburn, who's witnessed this reunion, can't take it anymore and comes out to face the brothers. He admits he artificially inflated the company's profits in an attempt to attract investors. And Chris wasn't supposed to untangle the case. But he did, and Blackburn had to eliminate Ed and Rita, who could have found out. But he wants to save lives, and Chris doesn't even know what that means. Before they part, Braxton says he'd like to see his brother again, and Chris replies that he'll find him himself. A few days later, at a press conference devoted to the living Robotics case, Medina is given the floor, and in that moment, Ray realizes he's finally found a worthy replacement. Soon another married couple brings their son to the Harbor Neuroscience Clinic. While the parents discuss their child's condition with the owner of the establishment, the boy walks into a room and meets Justine, that same little girl who, many years ago, helped young Chris finish his puzzle. Now grown, Justine can't speak and communicates through a speech synthesizer, and she greets the boy with the words,
Hello, Dreamboat. Shall we chat?
Soon, Dana returns to Chris's garage, but finds only an empty space. And when she gets home, she's met by a courier delivering that very painting of dogs playing poker. Examining the canvas, she notices a flaw in the corner, and suddenly realizes that beneath the cheap painting lies a genuine masterpiece, the very canvas that had once amazed her in Chris's trailer. And Chris himself sets off once again to find a new place where he can start over.
Life is a series of choices, none of which are new. List is choosing to be a victim.